On this Friday night, millions baking in unbearable heat. The dangers of cooling off at some Canadian beaches.
It's definitely disappointing.
And the worries about a worsening drought. Seawater becoming hot tubs, the dire consequences for Florida's coral reefs, and the mission for conservationists. New evidence against a former Supreme Court judge accused of misconduct.
That's him. That's him.
The police body cam video just released. And a Ukrainian fencer makes a point.
Rules must be changed.
The defiant act that nearly derailed her chances to compete, but won her worldwide support.
Global National with Farah Nasser. Reporting tonight, Neetu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We are hearing new warnings the planet might be at the point of no return. From rampant wildfires to record-breaking heat waves this summer, the effects of climate change are being felt across Canada. Today, there were multiple heat warnings in parts of Atlantic Canada and up north in the Yukon and Northwest Territories. But the largest area under a heat warning is one of the most densely populated parts of the country. More than 7 million people live in the region, spanning from the southernmost corner of Ontario to just north of the Greater Toronto area. Temperatures there are scorching. Environment Canada says several spots saw the humidex reach 40 degrees. In our top story tonight, Eric Sorensen looks at the toll these soaring temperatures are taking.
A dip in the lake, just what the doctor ordered in a heat wave, except health officials in Toronto have declared 4 public beaches in Toronto unsafe for swimming. While some take to the water anyway, others are staying out and keeping their kids out too.
They like splashing around in it, so it's definitely disappointing when the E. coli levels are too high for them to go in.
With E. coli, health issues typically arise first from rainfall. Heavy rains over the country's biggest city cause runoff into the lake and E. coli levels to spike.
And you can see a very predictable rise in E. coli and other bacterial counts in the lake.
Toronto beach advisories have happened many summers over the years from high E. coli levels, but the problem could get worse in the future. With big rainfalls and longer, hotter summers, just another consequence of climate change. Toronto health officials are out every day testing. Research has shown that E. coli bacteria thrive in warmer water, and climate modeling predicts hotter weather going forward.
Heat waves will become more intense, and they will last longer and more frequent as we head into the future. We have to be concerned about the changes that may come because there are impacts.
If there's more frequent large storms and more runoff or higher temperatures, unfortunately, there's a possibility that we'll see more frequent closures because of bacterial counts.
It has been a hot and brutal summer across the country, the worst year for wildfires in Canadian history. In British Columbia, drought conditions are getting worse, and the driest time of year, the month of August, is still to come. In Vancouver, new restrictions will kick in this Friday, prohibiting lawn watering and other water uses for the first time in 8 years.
We are calling on everyone in BC to reduce their water usage. Every drop counts.
And a cautionary tale out of North Vancouver. Earlier this month, a man discarded a cigarette near a backyard pool, and 6 hours later, the fire broke out. The flames and embers spread quickly. A reminder that while a warming climate is creating more risks for wildfires, humans are still responsible for many of the fires that break out in this country. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Extreme weather is also hitting the U.S., leaving millions in potentially dangerous conditions. According to that country's National Weather Service, 60% of the U.S. population is under heat advisories or flood warnings. That's roughly 200 million people. Forecasters expect heat records in several major cities to be smashed this weekend, with places like New York and Washington already feeling hotter than 35 degrees due to humidity. Yesterday in Phoenix, where people have been burned from sitting on pavement, the city marked 28 straight days of temperatures hitting at least 43 degrees Celsius. That's 10 days longer than the previous record set in 1974. Later on Global National, the race to save endangered coral off Florida's coast, how climate change has sped up coral bleaching, and the fears the devastation could spread around the world. For now, though, there are signs the Canadian economy may finally be slowing down. Preliminary data shows gross domestic product shrank in June, the first contraction this year. It follows a 0.3% bump in May, matching economists' expectations. Mackenzie Gray looks at what's happening and what it all means for your bottom line.
United will never be defeated.
Public sector strikes and raging wildfires still couldn't stop the Canadian economy from continuing to post modest growth.
The fact that the economy managed to churn out decent growth in the second quarter, especially given the challenges it was dealing with, is a little bit of a win.
Strong wholesale and manufacturing numbers, combined with resilient consumer spending, saw the largest growth in the Canadian economy since January. But there were some negatives. Oil and gas took a major hit, down 2.1% because of the wildfires in Alberta, but even then, that slowdown is likely temporary.
The decline was not as significant as we've seen in previous instances, notably the pandemic, the Fort McMurray fire.
Despite high interest rates, increased immigration helped housing prices continue to roar forward. Sales were up 7.6% in May, but new construction was down 1.8%. The wrong combination for those looking to see prices drop, but high interest rates will likely soon have an impact.
From this point forward, with overnight rate as high as 5%, it's really hard to see just the strength in housing activity being sustained over the year.
But continued growth might be coming to an end. StatsCan is predicting a 0.2% contraction in June, which calls into question the Bank of Canada's projected soft landing. That's where inflation gets to 2% and the Canadian economy doesn't go into a recession. Many private sector economists believe a minor recession is likely later this year, leading to a different kind of landing.
I think what I would say for Canada is we're looking at a hard-ish landing here. Not really a full-on recession, but as you say, a bumpy ride.
That turbulence is likely to lead Tiff Macklem to hit pause on rate hikes.
The Bank of Canada will not raise rates any higher. It has done enough to start to bring inflation down.
The expected June GDP drop represents the first major issue for Justin Trudeau's economically focused cabinet, as they hope to avoid a recession or at least navigate through it, Neethu.
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa. Thanks, Mackenzie. A member of Parliament is calling on Ottawa to halt funding for the Calgary Stampede. At issue is a lawsuit alleging the organization allowed a performing arts school staff member to sexually abuse boys. A partial settlement has been reached. In 2018, Philip Harima was sentenced to 10 years in prison for sexual offenses against 6 teens who were members of the Young Canadians. After previously denying any wrongdoing, the Calgary Stampede accepted liability and negligence this week for being aware of the abuse, saying they should have known much sooner. Calgary Skyview MP George Chahal says the Stampede has lost people's trust, adding in a statement that funding should only be reconsidered when the victims feel that genuine accountability and reconciliation have occurred. A clearer picture is emerging of an alcohol-fueled night that cost a Canadian Supreme Court justice his job. Global News has obtained new body cam footage of a confrontation from last winter involving former Judge Russell Brown. He resigned last June after a complaint to the Canadian Judicial Council, but details remain hidden from the public. Touria Izri reports on the push for more transparency here at home.
This guy's a Supreme Court justice. He's literally Supreme Court justice of Canada.
You can't see the former Supreme Court judge in the video, but witnesses say you can hear him.
Oh man, he's serenading in a tuxedo.
Yeah. The incoherent voice allegedly belongs to Russell Brown.
Hey, Justin's gonna love this.
Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister.
Heard in new body cam video released to Global News by Arizona's Paradise Valley Police Department. A group of friends met the ex-judge from Alberta at a hotel bar last January. Brown was in town to speak at a legal gala. They allege the former justice was drunk and started harassing the women at the table, then tried following them up to their room.
Groping them at the table and everything.
Sorry that you had to prove for them.
Someone complained to the Canadian Judicial Council, and a few days later, Brown was placed on leave. Nothing was made public, just an asterisk on a case he was supposed to hear, confirming he did not participate. The news eventually came out, with U.S. authorities releasing body cam video.
What you have here is a stark contrast between the way matters are dealt with in the United States and the way that they're dealt with here when it comes to the judiciary. And as you've seen in the United States, there's tremendous transparency.
Brown has called the allegations contradictory and inaccurate, but resigned last month.
One complaint is one too many. It should never happen. But that's reality. It happens.
Brown stepped down before the Canadian Judicial Council released a report into his conduct. It recommended a public inquiry, which now won't happen since he resigned. But the council is keeping its findings secret.
I find that extraordinary. A report that was intended to make a hearing public itself is being kept in private.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will now have to review applications for Brown's replacement. The deadline to apply for the job closed 1 week ago. Touria Izri, Global News, Ottawa.
The legal troubles surrounding former U.S. President Donald Trump just keep on growing. He was hit with additional charges late Thursday in a case linked to his handling of sensitive documents. The U.S. government alleges Trump, an aide and an IT worker at his Florida estate, were actively plotting to tamper with security cameras. Reggie Cicchini reports.
The abuse of power, it is prosecutorial misconduct.
Denial remains Donald Trump's #1 defense tactic after the special counsel investigating the mishandling of classified documents filed a superseding indictment on Thursday.
This is one of those crimes where the cover-up is worse than the crime.
The original indictment detailed 31 counts of willful retention of classified material by the former president, hinting at one specific document believed to be plans for an attack on Iran. Trump is now charged with having that document, along with new obstruction charges that swept up a Mar-a-Lago staffer, with claims that Trump directly led efforts to delete surveillance footage showing boxes being moved. Trump denies wrongdoing.
Destroying evidence in response to a grand jury subpoena, attempting to do so, conspiring to do so, is more problematic than the false statements or the Espionage Act charges.
The new charges came as a surprise as Trump's legal team focused on a looming indictment in Washington over his efforts to overturn the 2020 election.
Poll numbers are through the roof, but they did this in order to get me out.
Despite Trump's legal woes, his playbook of criticizing the process and playing the victim still seems to be working to his advantage, being leaps and bounds from his closest competition.
They know him, they're used to him, they like his positions, and also they hate the media so much that the media telling them that Trump can't win is another incentive for them to vote for Trump.
Trump's campaign and court calendars, meanwhile, are about to feel the squeeze, with 5 civil and federal trial dates already scheduled starting in October. And that doesn't include anything from the state of Georgia, where barricades now surround a courthouse in Atlanta, where Trump faces the possibility of yet another indictment into election interference. Neetu?
Reggie Cicchini in Washington. Thanks, Reggie. A military general has declared himself the new leader of Niger after a coup that toppled the president of the small West African country. On state television, General Abdourahmane Tiani called on international partners to cooperate with his new regime. He also again accused ousted President Mohamed Bazoum of poor governance and deteriorating national security. Bazoum, a key ally of the West in Africa, was arrested by his own presidential guard led by Tiani during Wednesday's military-backed coup. He's not formally surrendered power. International allies have widely condemned the plot, calling for Bazoum's immediate reinstatement. Our country's women's national soccer team nets a tentative deal with the sport's governing body. But the athletes are not celebrating. We'll tell you why coming up. Police in Nova Scotia say the search for a missing youth following last weekend's devastating flooding is expanding. Authorities say they have exhaustively covered the original search area and are now searching in a neighboring field and an extended stretch of a nearby river. Yesterday, police confirmed the identities of the 3 bodies recovered this week as 52-year-old Nicholas Holland and 6-year-old Natalie Harnish and Colton Cisco. A man connected to an investigation into the deaths of 8 migrants in Quebec has been found dead. Police say the body of 30-year-old Casey Oakes was found in the St. Lawrence River earlier this month. He had been missing since March. Oakes' boat was found near the bodies of 8 migrants in late March. It's believed the 2 families, including 2 young children, were trying to cross into the U.S. illegally from Canada. The Canadian women's national team has reached an interim agreement with Canada Soccer to secure compensation for 2023. The deal includes prize money from the ongoing FIFA Women's World Cup and ensures equal pay with the men's national team. There was little celebration over today's announcement. In a statement, the team says, "We have been forced to choose between compensation and the funding required to hold necessary training camps." And it says, "This is not over." The 7th-ranked Canadian women have been without a labor deal since the end of 2021. Ahead, why conservationists are removing coral in the hopes of rescuing Florida's reefs. Typhoon Doksuri swept into southern China and Taiwan today, unleashing violent winds and heavy rain on millions in the region. Gusts are said to have reached nearly 175 kilometers per hour during the peak of the storm. It was so powerful, at one point, roof tiles were seen flying off of a local stadium. State media says more than 400,000 people had to be evacuated because of the storm. In the U.S., scientists say climate change is driving an ecological catastrophe off the coast of Florida, where ocean temperatures are shattering records. In some places, the water is as warm as a hot tub, leading to a mass bleaching of coral reefs. As Jackson Prosco reports, the die-off is unprecedented and risks spreading to oceans around the world.
When researchers dove into the water off the Florida Keys, they were stunned by what they saw. Once pristine coral reefs are now ghost reefs. Everything is dead.
You can feel the heat in the water, and you look down and you see just white coral skeleton. It's heartbreaking.
The water here is so unnaturally hot, the delicate corals can't survive. Ocean temperatures have been above 32 degrees Celsius for weeks. Florida's Manatee Bay hit a record 38.4 degrees. That's the same temperature as a hot tub.
So if the coral animal begins to die, the reefs erode, the reefs break down. There's no more habitat left for these critical organisms that we rely on as people every day.
Corals protect land from hurricanes. They provide a home to fish and other marine life. And now they're at risk almost everywhere. Globally, sea surface temperatures, seen here in red, have soared off the charts. Scientists are stunned by how fast it's all happening and by how hot the water is.
When we realized all these temperatures were rising, we actually thought something might be broken with our model. It goes to show us how much excess heat energy from climate change, from global warming, how much of that excess heat the oceans have been absorbing.
Back in the water, there's now a desperate race against time. Conservationists are trying to rescue the most endangered corals, nursing them in tanks, hoping to eventually replant the reefs.
Right now, there are strains of coral in our nurseries, and there are outplanted corals on reefs that would not exist without our work.
Without global action to address climate change and bring down ocean temperatures, they admit they can only do so much. The trouble hidden below the surface is a clear warning sign about the dangers of our rapidly warming world. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Standing her ground next, the support for a Ukrainian fencer resolute in her contempt for Russia.
Global National, Canadian Screen Award winner for Best National Newscast.
Good sportsmanship is greatly valued in any competition, but what if your competitor is from a nation that's invading your own? This week at the World Championships, a Ukrainian fencer who won was disqualified all over a handshake. Mike Armstrong on the act of defiance and the outcome.
The International Fencing Association was warned this could happen. The Ukrainian team competing at the World Championships said its athletes wouldn't shake hands with athletes from Russia, with the two countries at war. Well, when four-time world champion Olga Harlan trounced her opponent Thursday, she extended her saber to tap blades instead of a handshake. That was what fencers did during the pandemic. Her opponent refused, but it wasn't over. Anna Smirnova didn't leave. She stayed on the fencing piste for more than 50 minutes. Smirnova demanded Harlan be disqualified for not shaking hands. It is in the rules, and she eventually was.
We just can't.
Harlan calls Thursday a difficult but important day. He says she was guided by her heart and that after a year and a half of fighting, a handshake with a Russian athlete would have been wrong.
Right now they kill people in my country and also they kill sport, in general.
Now, the refusal to shake hands has come up in other sports. The Ukrainian tennis player lost the match at this year's French Open to a Russian player and was booed by the crowd for what was seen as unsportsmanlike.
I don't know. I want to see people react to it in 10 years when the war is over. I think they will not feel really nice about what they did.
Now, after her disqualification, there was support for Harlan. The Ukrainian foreign minister says she showed dignity, while NHL Hall of Famer Dominik Hasek says she was put in an unfair position. He's calling on international sports federations and the International Olympic Committee to ban Russian and Belarusian athletes. Ukrainian officials called for the disqualification to be overturned. If it stood, Harlan wouldn't be eligible to compete at team events in the World Championships, and it would have seriously hurt her chances to qualify for next year's Olympics. Well, neither are going to be a problem. The suspension at the Worlds has been lifted, she can compete, and the head of the IOC, a former fencer himself, went even further. Thomas Bach wrote to Harlan Friday, saying even if she doesn't have enough qualification points, they will reserve a spot for her at the Paris Olympics. Mike Armstrong, Global News.
And that is Global National for this Friday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight's Your Canada is the community of Bergen, Alberta, about an hour northwest of Calgary. We love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks so much for watching and hope to see you here again tomorrow. Have a great night.